Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Education and Local Economy Scrutiny Commission. It's our first one, so hopefully we'll try and take it as easy as possible. My name is Councillor Jason Ottery, and I'm the chair of the commission. I thought it would be worth noting one thing to start off with, just for the benefit of new members on the commission who aren't familiar with the commission and how it works. We're not a decision-making body. What we're here to do is to gather as much evidence from our line of questioning, from people who we invite to come and give evidence to us, so that we're able to make informed decisions, or informed recommendations, I beg your pardon, that are helpful to the council's overall decision-making process. So we're not a decision-making body. So I thought it would be worth highlighting that for those who are listening online, and as well as for those in the room who are new to the commission. There are no planned fire tests this evening, but if you do hear the fire alarm, please leave by the nearest fire exit and make your way to the agreed assembly point, which is on St. John's Churchyard, just off Druid Street. Council security staff will be available to direct you. For members and those who are in the public gallery, of which is just council officers, but for those who are to join, the public toilets are located just off the main reception. I will implore all of you to please switch off your mobile phones onto silent whilst in the meeting room, and members of public are welcome to film, audio record, photograph, or tweet the public proceedings of the meeting. And I'd ask you to be considerate towards other people in the room and take care not to disturb the proceedings. If you are filming the meeting, please do not film the audience. A copy of the council's protocol for reporting and filming is available on Southwark Council's website. And the code for accessing Southwark Wi-Fi is FR 33, as in 33, capital WIFI exclamation mark. This meeting is being live streamed via Zoom platform to YouTube and will be uploaded to Southwark Council's YouTube channel by tomorrow. For members, I will remind you, please raise up your hand if you wish to speak or ask a question, and please wait until I've given you permission to speak before contributing. That just allows, it allows for an orderly meeting. Please can I ask members to refrain from digressing onto other issues and keep their comments and questions concise, specific to the agenda item being discussed. I think, yeah, I won't make that point. In terms of apologies, apologies we've received so far are from Martin Brecknell, co-opted member, and also apologies from Councillor Renata Hambas, who's kindly been substituted by Councillor Maggie Browning. Thank you, Maggie Browning. We also have apologies from Lynette Murphy O'Dwyer. We have one apologies for lateness, which is from Marcin Jagodinski. Sure, she'll help me pronounce it better at a future date. Can we just have a confirmation of voting members? So would voting and non-voting members present in the room please show their hands or respond verbally when their name is called out? So my name is Councillor Jason Ottery and I'm the chair and I'm a voting member. Councillor Rachel Bentley. Thank you very much. Councillor Chloe Tomlinson. Thank you, Chloe. Councillor Joseph Bambu. Yeah. Thank you. You make me feel like a school teacher. Councillor Cassandra Brown. Yeah. Councillor Maggie Brown. Yeah. Thank you. Councillor David Watson. Thank you. And voting co-opted members. So Manakagbo. Thank you. And I'll do the here virtually for Marcin Jagodinski, who's late. Are there any notifications of items of business which is deemed urgent at all? I don't think there is, so I'll answer that question myself. And does any member wish to declare any interests or dispensations in respect of any of the items of business to be considered at this meeting? Yes, Councillor Rachel Bentley.
Okay. So I just wanted to mention that in my day job, I work for CLES, which is Centre for Local Economic Strategies, and it is mentioned in one of the reports.
Okay.
But I don't work on any of the work that they're doing for Southwark Council.
Okay.
But I just wanted to flag that.
Thank you very much. That's noted. Thank you. Thank you. So the first item on the agenda, we'll be looking at pupil places, specifically looking at the shortfall in primary pupil numbers across Southwark. Now, I'll open this up by first stating that this issue is not an issue that's specific to Southwark. It's not specific to London. We know that it's a national issue, but we know that it's affecting us here in Southwark. And so what we thought would be helpful for today is we have Councillor Jasmine Ali and we have Nina Doho here with us to give us the lay of the land as to what they're hearing and what they're seeing in respect to this topic for us here in Southwark. And this will give us the opportunity as the Education and Local Economy Scrutiny Commission to really be able to highlight issues that we should be gathering evidence on. And partially that evidence will come from some Southwark Council officers, but it will also include other bodies in the future, including the GLA, the ONS around statistics, and also us seeking to get some evidence from other bodies that have done some work in this space too. So I'll invite Councillor Jasmine Ali to first open up by addressing the Commission, and then we'll open up and then we'll pass it over to Nina, should she have anything further to add, and then we'll open up to questions and answers. Is that all good? Perfect. Yeah. Councillor Jasmine Ali, over to you.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you so much for inviting me, and congratulations on your awesome committee. I really look forward to seeing, some of the projects further on down the line, and I'm so glad that you're shining a light on this particular issue, which is, I think it's no exaggeration to say that it's Nina and my most knotty issue. So I've got a set of slides for you, which I've put together, but I'll canter through them. But I thought sometimes it's quite good, isn't it, having been a scrutineer, to just have things to refer back to. And I just hope, really, there are other reports that we can give you, which indeed you probably have. But I think, really what I want to do with this is give you a quick canter through some context, really. So if that's all right, I'll begin. Okay, there's some information here which you may find useful when you're writing up your report, but you'll have these at your disposal. But this is demographics, and we'll come on later on why this is quite important. But this is how it is now, very useful borough, still looking at the census data. I mean, before we get onto this, it's worth saying this up front. Every time the census is, reported on, there's that big fight, isn't there, between London and the rest of the country, because we say that actually the census never really picks up the amount of people living in London. That there's, quite often a hidden layer of people that aren't picked up on the census. And obviously that's true. And that's why we get shortchanged as well. That's one of the products of this. But actually there's something else going on here, because the demographics are changing a little bit. And we saw, in other local authorities, that there was, they were so stark that the information was coming out before it was published. There was stuff, on quite a steep, shedding of families in North London, like Camden, and as we know, we've had an impact on our families and our children population going down. We'll talk about that a little later, but I just wanted to set the scene. There's something going on in London. Okay, so the primary schools, and this is what the issue when we're thinking about falling roles. I mean, basically, this has hit the primary schools in particular, really. And weirdly, most of the primaries, you know, are under our control. There's a breakdown here. So when you're doing your analysis and your report, you know, you won't have to fish around for this. It's on this slide. And then we've got secondary schools, which feels comparatively like much more like Academy Central, as you can see there, where, you know, we like have the primaries. But although I don't want to give you the wrong impression, because quite a few primaries have, you know, been academised, but, you know, nevertheless, you can understand in terms of falling roles that the financial risk, you know, is very much with us. So in Southwark, we have a mix of schools. We have 95% good and outstanding. I'll get onto standards in a minute. And before 2010, we were, you know, joint bottom really. So we have travelled a long way. We have also, and this is, you know, important to get your head around this, because we found ourselves in this situation. And in 2010, we didn't have enough places. Now, by law, we have to provide school places, but we didn't have enough, and the demand outstripped, you know, the supply. So you'll know that we were busy, you know, making deals with schools, refurbishing, extending form entries, and building new schools. So you have here, and they weren't just any old schools as well. I mean, you'll be familiar with the term. I mean, I'm sure many of you know about Rome, and maybe many of you have been to Rome, but there's this term, isn't there, architecturally, about this Baroccan surprise. You find yourself walking around, and then all of a sudden you'll see this like beautiful building. Well, basically, Southwark's no exception. When you've got schools, you'll be walking around, and you know, you'll find yourself in a part of Southwark, and then you'll see a beautiful building, usually head to toe, you know, from ceiling to floor, glass and beautiful materials, natural materials. And, you know, these buildings, I will go on very quickly. There's the Albion School, there's Cherry Garden, you know, also for children with special needs, also young people with special needs, you know, primary, nursery and secondary. We have, you know, pretty beautiful schools. Then there's the Belham Primary School. That's where my children go to, down the road. You can see that's had a refurb, an old Victorian building, but, you know, absolutely award-winning. The Southwark Inclusive Learning Service, you know, this is, I could be corrected, but I'm pretty sure that this is either up for an award or has won an award. And so, you know, beautiful environments for, you know, all our children to learn in, particularly those excluded from mainstream education. Okay, Rotherhithe Primary. Charles Dickens. You get the picture. I mean, there are more, but I just wanted to, you know, build it up to see that we've had, you know, no less than a 200 million investment in these schools, and that's been since 2010. Okay, when the Labour journey really started. So Southwark Primary Schools then, I mean, there's a link between beautiful buildings and standards and great teaching. And, you know, obviously, I'd like to, you know, thank Nina and her team, you know, who work brilliantly with schools. And between them all, you know, they have, you know, quite a brilliant offer for our children and young people. And you can see for yourself, you know, that we've travelled a long way. You've got the information there about Southwark and the national comparisons. There, you know, the percentage of schools that are good and better and are the best that they've ever been. School improvement success, the achievements are a result of the expertise and hard work and determinations of our head teachers, teaching support staff who work tirelessly. I mean, we saw through the pandemic, didn't we, that actually our schools are like the emergency services, open, you know, for children of key workers, open for children at the edge of care, you know, not quite in the care system, but, you know, identified as having unmet needs. So, you know, basically, what a great offer. So, where is this leading? Finally get there. Falling birth rates. So here are the trends so that you can have those for your analysis. And as you can see, you know, when we were reporting on this, I mean, it's interesting, by 2018, I mean, I felt like my predecessor had all the fun, really. She built all these beautiful buildings, and then all of a sudden I was like turning up, you know, like a little bit mealy mouthed, saying, you know, that there's a a fall in the birth rate. It almost felt like I was, basically in a utopian, dystopian even. Glad I got that right, novel. Okay, so the fall in birth rates there, you can see it on the chart. It's really dropping. As I said, when I introduced about the census, there's something happening here. Falling roles, as you can see, I mean, there's nothing like a graph, is there? And you can see, the extent of this here. So what is going on then? The GLA projections, if one could make sense of those, I mean, presumably they were telling us which direction we were going in, but actually they were caught up in a lot of these new phenomena as well. I mean, the London councils do the math report. I've put the link on this slide, Jason. So I do recommend, if you're coming to this, do have a look at this, because it gives you some interesting trends and, really helps you, have an understanding of what's going on and where we've been. Uncertainties around Brexit, obviously, you guys will know about that. The global pandemic, obviously, that I don't want to overstate this, because everyone knows someone that's moved out. People have thought, well, look at Zoom, we can work from anywhere and hold down a city job. So that has had an impact as well. Housing shortages, again, this is a big issue, and I know that you'll be looking at this and underneath it, and the census. Now, I do want to say one thing here. I did tell Jason at the beginning of the meeting rather excitedly that I wasn't excited about talking at the public policy exchange so much. Not always my politics, I have to say, but nevertheless, they did hold a conference on this, and I turned up, and then they had like some really, actually, I will give you the names of some of them, because maybe you might want to have some of the more nerdy, and I use the word nerdy as a compliment, not an insult. Basically nerdy people from around the country talking, enthusiastically about what's going on with the people place planning. And I think there's something here that someone could do, either, a journalist that's, very analytical or very ambitious, or for your scrutiny committee, because what I think could be done is to get the information from the census, get the information from the GLA, get the information from London councils, look at it with no one really cross-checked this data, with the NHS data, and that would have told us, I mean, I'm not going to exaggerate, not all we needed to know, but it certainly would have given us a head up about what was going on with the birth rate, surely. And so there's lots of data sets that haven't been really explored. So, I mean, if you've got the time and I know that you'll want to be thorough, but there's a job here that no one else has done, and I think if someone does it, would be doing a great service to Southwark, but nationally, because I tell you now, a lot of people have been talking about the London phenomena, people moving out and everything, but at that conference, it really dawned on me that Middlesbrough were there and they were talking about the same phenomena, and East Riding, Yorkshire. And so, they were having, I mean, Middlesbrough were quite interesting that they said that they would have been in the same position as we are now. But what saved them, weirdly, is that some students who would normally be coming from Nigeria and also Bangladesh wanted to come to London as mature students, so they already had families. But London was locked down, so they ended up going to Middlesbrough, and that saved a lot of their primary schools. So, that's quite interesting. Oh, no, sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Right, okay. Mitigation then. So we looked at pupil admission numbers. We looked at bringing those down. I mean, I think I told some of you before that what we managed to do in 2018 was we managed to bring down the pupil admission numbers for up to 13 or 14 schools. And the average was 130 to 90, and that gave them a breathing space. But of course, that's not in our power, because that there's a powerful link between pupil numbers and school finances. I don't think that was a Labour idea, but nevertheless, that's where we are. So what happened there is, we managed to take some of the pressure off these schools. So they had lower pupil admission numbers, and, the financial pressure was off. and the schools adjudicator is the only entity that's able to agree that. Federation, we're busy talking about schools, mergers, working together, reducing the back office costs, reducing the building costs, repurposing the schools for community use, also for pupils with special education needs. Although I will say there is a demand for that. But, credit to Nina and her team, they had already opened beautiful special education needs that are rated good and outstanding, not just for nursery, for primary, but also for secondary. And we repurposed a college for special education needs. So we're already working in that space. So there's only so much development you can do, with schools that are struggling in the special needs space, if you understand. We set up a special member officer group to get on top of this. We've got some case studies, as you know. St John's of Walworth, that closed. And, that was a pretty heartfelt experience, because we're not talking about just buildings, are we? We're talking about hearts of the community. We've spent all this time. A lot of councillors have been to St John's of Walworth. Some councillors had children going there while this was all happening. So we had to work really, really hard to make sure that when, and actually I do want to say that these two schools on here, the first up, are faith schools. So isn't that interesting that church schools are having the lowest numbers now? And I'm told by the people that I met at that conference the other day that that's the national picture. Anyway, so with St John's of Walworth, we were able to have neighbouring schools for the children there that had to find alternative places at good and outstanding schools. And I have to say credit to Nina personally and her team for holding all the teachers through this traumatic experience, holding the parents and holding the children. So, basically that was closed. That wasn't our decision. That was the CFE. I mustn't get my denominations mixed up, especially given that you're live streaming this. But the CFE diocese, they basically made the decision to close her. And now we have St. Francesca Cabrini. Now, this is an interesting case study because the nuns that run that order, they basically said that they want to sell that building. The numbers were going down as well. But what happened is when you open this up and consult to talk with the community, the parents, some parents didn't even wait for the consultation. Do you know that they unceremoniously, took their children out and moved them on? So as you can see, once this starts, there's a whole unstoppable force that, it's very hard to act on. It kind of acts on everyone around it. But nevertheless, we are working, strategically around this. But these are the lessons that are coming up. So where next? I'll sum up now and hand over to Nina. But we wrote a letter to the Education Secretary. I told you before, we had this, I had it on my desktop for quite a while, actually, because I'd already written to Gavin Williamson so many times, I think 6 times without one answer. But when Nadeem Zahawi was Education Secretary, on the day that he started, I was able to send this letter saying, look, our schools have been your fourth emergency service. I knew that it would strike a chord with him because he'd obviously, been the power behind the vaccination program. I said, so can you help us now? Give us some breathing space and can you write off some of the funding? We did the math. It's all in the letter. You can see he did write back, but not in the manner that we would have wanted. So basically he said that he'd given us some money. Could we get it out of that? But actually do the math. It didn't really equate. Small classes to facilitate, the loss of face-to-face education after the year that was. Kevin Collins, who was basically, the face of the day for Boris Johnson, who was basically working up all these plans to help our children to catch up. What better way to help children catch up after the year that was than smaller classes? So, why are we thinking about rationalising and closing our schools when actually we could take advantage of this while we weather the storm and help our children, catch up for missed face-to-face education. There's a green paper on special education needs. Obviously, there's some good ideas like the last legislation that came from them. But, you know, if you remember with the HCPs, they improved the service, but they didn't pay for it. And we, you know, it was a colossal, you know, a colossal deficit that we accrued on our DSG, Departmental Schools Grant. The white paper on schools, maybe we'll talk about that later, but I'm sure Nina's got something to say. But there's one omission on this. I'll save you a bit of time. Even though it's not just a London phenomenon, falling roles, even though I've said it's nationally, there's not national issue as well. There's no mention, you know, of falling roles in that white paper. Anyway, we will produce a strategy for Cabinet. Obviously, we've been working, you know, with our member officer group. We're becoming, you know, it's getting a bit more business as usual now, I hate to say. And we are producing a strategy. It's going to PolCab. It will be going to, you know, basically I'll bring it to groups of councillors. And when we've all seen that and had a look at that, we will be taking that to Cabinet in September, if I'm right, but I'll be corrected by Nina on this, but I think that's when we said we'd take it. So basically, I don't think I've got anything else to say. I will try and stop sharing my slides, and I'll hand over to the real expert in the room, no pressure intended, Nina.
Thanks a lot. Nina, thanks for your time and coming before the commission this evening. If you could introduce yourself, your role, that would be helpful.
Hello, everybody. Nina Dole, Director for Education, and I've been Director since January 2016.
Thank you very much. Just before we give you the opportunity to shed a bit more light on the topic at hand, I think just on the point that Jasmine makes about the white paper and it having no mention of falling school roles, I think we should take it upon ourselves as a commission to write to at least the select committee of the education select committee chaired by Robert Halfon to highlight that point, and at least he can then raise that with the relevant cabinet member, whoever that is, or cabinet minister, whoever that is. Well, it might change in September, but yes, I think that would be a good opportunity where we can all write a joint letter as a committee on that point. But yes, over to you, Nina. If you can shed a bit more light maybe on what Jasmine has said, and if not, we can go direct to asking some questions to you.
Okay, thanks. So I think Councillor Ali's laid out a very clear picture. We've had a trend of declining birth rate and falling roles in our primary sector. We've got probably around about, as we sit here now, probably about just over 5,000 vacant school places across the system. I think it was very helpful of yourself, Chair, to preface the opening tonight by saying it's not a Southwark specific issue. It is very much a London-wide issue. And obviously now there are parts of the country where there is also an impact. So probably about a year ago, I did contact the DFE directly to ask whether they were tracking or monitoring or analysing patterns of movement. You know, we've been hearing about families moving out of London, and so we were very interested. Well, where are they going? Is there some monitoring of this? And I was told that there isn't. So there does seem to be a great lack of interest at DFE level around the issue around vacant school places, falling roles. I think it has been left to the department's representatives through the regional schools commissioners to look at a localised look at localized solutions. But when I last contacted, I think it was Councillor Ali and I wrote to Nadeem Zahawi around the falling roles issue, and the response that we had at that time was each local authority would need to find their own solutions to deal with the issue. So there was no wider national or area-wide strategic approach to this, and still isn't. So that's the kind of background, Councillor Ali mentioned that there would be a paper coming to Cabinet in September. We're working on that now, and that's coming forward for a discussion at PolCab next week. And that's really about how in Southwark we will need to look at how we manage that surplus capacity, because that direct correlation that's already been made between how schools are funded through per pupil, and if you have vacant spaces in your school, in your classrooms, that means that you're losing funding, which means that you don't have as much money to run the school and the curriculum and maintain the quality of teaching. So this is what we saw happening at St John's Woolworth, where there was such a fall in pupil roles that it really compromised their ability to provide a good quality of education. So we fought very hard here in Southwark over the last 10, 12, 15 years to bring our schools up from being really at the bottom of the league tables in every respect to really being in the top 10%. You know, by September, the league table will show more than 96% of our schools good and outstanding, and that's major. We have over 110 schools, so that's really quite significant. Outcomes have gone from strength to strength year on year, so that's been hard fought and hard won. So everything that we do now, it may feel painful, it may seem hard, but it has to be about protecting that quality of education for our children. That is our number one priority. So the paper that will come forward to Cabinet in September is really saying, well, look, this is the context that we're working in, and we need to find a way through to reducing that surplus capacity in our schools through working with parents, families, but particularly school leaders in how we do that. So Councillor Ali's touched on some of the approaches that we've tried that we've been trying in the last, I'd say, 10 years, which is through a natural process to start with. We were trying to bring schools together to work in pairs, threes. That began as an organic process, but as we could see how the landscape was shifting, we've tried to actively promote that and bring more schools together. So reducing per pupil admission numbers as well, so that schools know how much budget they're going to get, and they can structure their staff accordingly and plan the curriculum accordingly. So these have had some effect, but what the issue has been that we just have not been able to, the strategies that we've employed have not kept up to pace with the extent of and the scale and the speed of the falling roles. So we also, Councillor Harris also mentioned in her presentation the GLA projections. Now these are the projections that I think there's, with the exception of one local authority across London, all local authorities are using to help plan their educational provision. So it's not an exact science. It has been a bit off the mark in recent years, but most recently the GLA have also conceded that actually their data has been a bit off course. So the expansion programme that we saw in Southwark, again, was based on the predicted growth in pupil numbers. We did see that for a couple of years, but I don't think the scale and the speed of the falling roles has been predicted, and we're basically playing catch up. So that kind of adds a little bit more flesh to some of the things that Councillor Ali said. And I'm very happy to take questions on any particular aspects that you might be interested in.
Thank you, Councillor. And thank you, Leader.
like that. Sorry, very new. But yeah, thanks both for all that information. It's really useful, and yeah, as somebody who until very recently taught in a Southwark school and saw classes like, you know, a year groups having to merge classes and do things like that, I understand like this is an incredibly difficult issue, and without the government making up the funding, like it really is, you know, a difficult one for the council to deal with. And I know that a lot of effort is going into making sure it has as least disruptive impact as possible. So I'm very appreciative of that. I guess I've got a couple of questions. One of them is kind of a bit more general, which is obviously Jasmine's talked about the Do the Math report, which definitely will go and have a good look at. But I guess what I would find it helpful to see is I think all the data that's been shown has been about the impact in Southwark. And while I understand it's a national issue and a London-wide issue, I would personally find it useful to see that like a bit quantified a little bit more clearly. So, for instance, some of the statistics that are quite shocking are things like even just things like historically, like reception cohorts were typically 70% of the birth rates. Like, I'd be interested to know, presumably those 30% of children are going somewhere between being born and being age 4. And so I'd be interested to see a bit more like what those patterns look like across the country. Is it that parents, when they have children, then generally leave big cities? And if there's any places like in London which are bucking any of those trends, like obviously we can sort of assume that some of these issues, in addition to COVID, are down to things like housing or just preference for living in less busy spaces when you're bringing up children. But it'd be interesting to kind of just see a bit more of the detail in the differences there and how it varies, because I think if we do want to address this problem, it would be good to have a really detailed understanding of exactly what the trends are like, and if there is any boroughs where they have good practice which make even like, you know, places like Southwark that are in big cities really desirable places to bring up children. So I don't know if there is any more information on that, but I'd be really grateful to see it if there is. And then I also wanted to ask about like what's being done to ensure this doesn't impact negatively on working class pupils. As someone who's spent most of my adult life teaching, I'm very aware of how our school system often does fall short when it comes to supporting working class pupils. And I guess like as a kind of like hypothetical example of what I would worry about is if you have 2 schools in an area and one of them is outstanding and doing a really good job and everyone wants to send their children there, and you have one that's like less good, maybe rated good by Ofsted, then I would worry that like the good school would be impacted more severely than the outstanding school. And we know that disadvantaged pupils are typically, I don't know if this is as true in Southwark as nationally, I haven't seen the data on that, but are typically like overrepresented in lower performing schools, and more middle class pupils are overrepresented in higher performing schools. So we could end up with a situation where it is schools that have more working class pupils who are hit hardest by this. So basically like how is data being collected on that? And what are we doing to actively reverse that trend? And related to that, sorry, this is the end of my second question, and then I'm done. Is I guess like I can envisage a situation where schools that are impacted in more middle class areas by this issue, you get some sort of like very vocal, like sharp-elbowed middle class parents who are very resistant to that impacting their children's schools. And so I think like it'd be really good to hear that Southwark is really on the front foot in making sure that we sort of like protect against any possibility of this disproportionately damaging working class pupils.
I won't take any more questions because I know there's a lot for you to tackle there. So yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so you can cover those, Nina, and then we'll come to Councillor Van Bay and Councillor David Bentley. Oh, Councillor Ali. Yeah, yes, you can. Do you want to? Yeah, we'll take you first, and then we'll go to Nina.
Oh, I don't mind. Sorry, I wasn't hearing. I mean, I'll just quickly give my answer, and then Nina might want, will want to have an answer, and hopefully they're the same, but you never know. But on the research and the data sets, the Do the Math report is worth looking at, and you can see, that I've looked at that data. I've analysed the London data, And basically, it all started in Lambeth and Southwark were the hardest hits, you know, and I remember talking to Southwark about that. But I think, you know, if you actually, you know, I think you're in a great position to call for this data and analyse it, because I think that's something that hasn't been done properly, really. I mean, one might say that the GLA do it, but, you know, look at the situation we're in now. So I think, you know, I'm all for, you know, basically cross-checking the data sets, really. But, you know, we can give you what we've got. You know, basically, we'll go away and give you what you've got. And then, you know, based on that conference I went to, I can give you a shopping list of things, what, you know, that you might look for. The other thing that I wanted to mention is this: what is being done to not impact on working class pupils? I mean, it's interesting that you should say that, really, because it seems to be hardest hit. You know, at first we were looking at it because it wasn't just St. John's of Walworth, but it was also, you know, basically a school near at Townsend School, which we ended up not closing in the end. But that felt that it was, you know, like quite an area which would have had more working class pupils. But I want to assure you, you know, at the time of speaking, that, you know, our schools have been on that journey. If you look back at the slides, which I will leave behind for you, Chloe, but, you know, we were joint bottom, and then we have raised, you know, 95% good and outstanding. And I think, you know, we may be closer to 100% by Christmas, I'm hoping. But, you know, I absolutely think that that's the name of the game, to put it crudely, in Southwark. The teachers, the teaching staff, the head teachers, you know, the whole education community have been committed to making sure that being in a low income household, being, you know, in poverty, being working class, you know, is not, you know, it's not going to be a hurdle to, you know, educational attainment in Southwark. So that's the journey that we have embarked on. So, you know, at the moment, you know, if we have to weather the, obviously quality will turn into quantity, you know, if we're not careful. But at the moment, if any schools have to close, we can pretty much guarantee them a place, you know, not too far, which is good or outstanding.
Thank you. Please.
Okay, I'll try and remember the questions. So I think in response to your first question, I think there are a couple of organisations, groups, people you might want to invite to the committee to share. If you're looking, if you're more interested in London-wide data, then I think you should approach the London councils, who will look more broadly across London. And there's also a pan-London place planning group. So I can get you the contact details for them. And I think that the committee should invite those organisations to come and share with you some of that data around the London-wide picture. And I've already said earlier that there hasn't seemed to have been an appetite to have that level of look at a national level in terms of the analysis of migration, population, falling roles. So it might be worth approaching the Secretary of State around that.
Okay.
For an update.
Just on Chloe's question though, which I don't think has been fully answered, apologies, is around us having reassurances as a committee that should there be a good school and should there be an outstanding school, and in the case where in the good school, say, there is a significant proportion of those who attend that school that are of working class background, that they're not disproportionately affected, although we have an ostensibly good situation of a good and outstanding school.
I'll try and answer that, but it's not straightforward. I mean, one of the more straightforward responses is that if there's any, if we're looking at school closures, for argument's sake, there would be an equalities impact assessment around that. In terms of good and outstanding schools, almost all of our primary schools are good. We have one requires improvement school in the borough. The rest are good and outstanding. And there's very, very little to choose between them. So it really does come down to parental preference. and what we always say to parents, because we can't direct parents to schools, what we always say to parents, go and have a look for yourself, because you may not like that school, your friend might, you might prefer the school down the road. So it depends on the the culture, the ethos, the environment, perhaps what's on offer, which may be similar but slightly different. It could be proximity. It could be a whole number of reasons why a family might prefer one school to another. Working class, well, I think post-COVID, it's very, the landscape, it's shifted. I mean, we can talk about working class, we can talk about the most disadvantaged, the least advantaged, however we want to frame it. That's shifting, that's changing. So we're seeing more and more children on free school meals. We're seeing more and more children who have fallen into that category that weren't in that category before COVID. So I think we have to think carefully about what we mean by working class, what we mean by most disadvantaged. So and I think when we're looking at reducing that capacity or merging schools or whatever it is, yes, we do have to look not just at disadvantage and advantage. We have to look at ethnicity. We need to look at all kinds of factors, parental choice. So it's not a simple equation, and it's not clearly as simple as, well, okay, we've got a bunch of schools here who really aren't performing very well, so actually it's probably best to do. We haven't got that, and in some ways, we are in that we're in a bit of a luxury position where it's hard to choose, actually, because there's no outlier that says this school is not performing.
Very helpful. Thank you. I'm conscious of time. Councillor, we'll go with Councillor David Watson, and then we'll come to you, Councillor Van Bay, and then Councillor Brown, and then Browning.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks for the presentations. So the just looking at the sorry, forgive me, it's my first meeting.
Sure,
so
no,
if I'm asking the wrong things, please tell me that it's out of scope. But I guess part of this is we're supposed to be trying to work out what data is useful to be able to help to deal with the fact that there's a shortage of pupils, right? And we've got a lot of information in here in this report about the falling population rates and the pupil premium. And I think you've given us some suggestions, Nina, as to how we might, and Councillor Ali's given us some suggestions about how we might find out more information about the impacts of migration, I guess with a view to kind of adopting mitigating policies or other measures. So I just wondered, there are other things here as well. So impact of Brexit and planning policy. I mean, are there people or bodies that we think we might ask to provide evidence to the committee in those areas in order to find out more about what those two factors, how important those two factors might be, and therefore for what we might do about them? I mean, on impact of Brexit, actually, it might be the think tank that Councillor Bentley might know best. But maybe on planning policy, there are some in-house colleagues that we might ask to present on those subjects. So just
no, I don't think that's out. I don't think that's out of scope at all. I know that's a topic that's come up in conversations that I've personally had with planning officers, and certainly I think as we gather evidence over the coming months, we certainly will have planning officers come and give evidence on that, particularly around family-sized homes, the opportunity that presents to fill some of our schools, particularly in the north of our borough, where I know, correct me if I'm wrong, the percentages are quite high. And so that's something we'll certainly do. But on Brexit, I think definitely inviting some evidence to be given from think tanks and other associated bodies won't do us any harm.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think there are colleagues internally that could help in terms of the housing policy and planning, and then colleagues in revenue and benefits may be able to help with around the Brexit and migration issues.
Thank you. Councillor Van Bay.
Thank you both for that presentation and report. I just wanted to know, in terms of our objectives, obviously I understand that there is falling birth rate and falling reception cohorts going on spanning a decade. I just wanted to know, and I also understand that with each pupil funding is given. I just wanted to know, do we have an objective that we're working towards in terms of what do we want the balance to be? So do we want there to be more pupils than there are vacancies, more vacancies than are pupils? And if so, do we have an established percentage? So I understand that there's 22% vacancies in primary schools as it stands. Do we have a clear objective of what we are working towards in terms of vacancies?
Councillor Ali, do you want to come in?
I was going to defer to Nina because there is a number, there's a tolerance level. Obviously, we've totally exceeded that now, but you know, the whole idea is that you have a bit of flex in the system, but you know, you have to meet demand because you know that's our statutory duty. But what is the number that, you know, the optimum number, Nina?
So unfortunately, we can't work towards an objective of having more children because they're just not there to be had. We'd love to have more children. The objective is to have full schools that are full. Now, there is a bit of flexibility in there in terms of full or how full. So the recommended vacancy rate is anywhere between 5 and 10%.
That's it, yeah.
So you know, you're talking about tolerance levels, Councillor Ali. So we think that, you know, if a school's got about 10% vacancy rate, they can manage okay, but much beyond that, and they will start to struggle and really have to look at reorganisations and making structural changes. So yeah, so that's the objective, to try and have schools that are more full.
Thank you. Councillor Brown?
Thanks for the presentation.
Oh, I think if you just, yeah.
Hello. 2 points and questions. So the first one is around the sort of reasons for the falling pupil numbers, and it feels to me like migration outside of London is a real chunky one in there, and there's some subtopics that I'd be interested in seeing more evidence around. So number one, concerns around the health and safety of bringing up children in London, particularly in regards to worsening air quality, which we know has worsened in line with the falling school places. So it'd be great to hear some more evidence around that. And also my second point / question is around the wider school ecosystem within Southwark, and thinking beyond schools that are managed by Southwark, but also private schools. And actually, have they seen similar trends? And perhaps is there, I don't know, an angle that we can take around that just hasn't been considered yet? Quite a broad thing that I'm throwing out there. I'm thinking, of course, about recent headlines from Sir Keir Starmer and what he said about, you know, changing the VAT regulations for private schools. And of course, that throws into question equality, which goes back to Councillor Tomlinson's point around working class students, because inevitably, most kids who are in Southwark schools are not going to be middle to upper class. And so I'd just be interested in some more evidence around that comparison.
Okay, so the first one around the health and safety around schools, I think it would be helpful to have colleagues from our environment measure from across the council, the Director for Climate Change, because there is an awful lot of work going on around greener schools, climate control, and I'm not best placed to speak about those initiatives. So I think it'd be helpful to have colleagues to come in and speak about those. In terms of private schools, actually in and around Southwark we have a lot independent schools, and what we've tended to have seen in the past, when there's been a recession or a downturn in the economy, that there does tend to be a little bit of a trickle back into maintained schools. We haven't seen that this time around. So again, I'm not an expert on how those schools are funded, you know, charity status, VAT, etc. I'm trying to think about who you might want to invite to talk about those sorts of things. I'll have a think about it. Cool.
Thank you. It sounds like the cost of living is not costing some people.
Can I
Councillor Ali.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we know, I mean, that's a great question about, you know, is the health and safety and the air quality driving families out? I think, you know, that absolutely must be a part of it, because, you know, I think the world was shocked, wasn't it, when we saw that Ellie Kissy Deborah, you know, on her death certificate, that it had, you know, the air quality, so, you know, the air pollution. So, you know, it must be a factor. And obviously we've been working, you know, you'll have seen, you know, I'm sure you can't really miss them, pictures of me and Councillor Rose cycling around schools, putting up green screens, planters and everything. And the schools themselves, you know, I went to speak to an assembly, and they've got a project about how they want to make their school, you know, like, you know, sort of the school streets and everything, but make it a nicer place to learn in, really, without pollution and green screens and everything. So that is, you know, a key factor. And I would have to say that that is, you know, perceptive. It must have an impact on people's decisions, you know. It can't be just, oh, I can live in the country, so therefore, you know, and hold that city job down. There must be other drivers here. And, you know, I think air quality, you know, has to be one of them.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. Councillor Browning.
Thank you very much for your report, Jasmine, and for that information that you've shared. Just a couple of questions from me. So with pupil roles, I guess the big impact is funding, right? Because it's per pupil funding. So just on that, I've just got a couple of queries. So obviously we have a policy of universal free school meals for primary school children, which is a brilliant policy that's been in place for over 10 years. I was just anecdotally, I was speaking to some head teachers in my part of the borough, and I'd be really interested to know if this is Jasmine and Nina's experience. Because free school meals are universal, it means that some families who are eligible to be like pupil premium are not signing up to it because they get it anyway, you know, which is obviously a good policy. And that means that the schools don't have accurate sort of numbers on who actually is pupil premium, which obviously affects their funding. So to me, when I heard that, I was like, oh, of course, that would be a consequence, but I hadn't thought of it before, and it probably has been mentioned and I hadn't paid attention. So that to me is obviously a kind of unexpected consequence of a very good policy, but that would really impact pupil funding for schools. So I'm really interested to know how much that is an issue. Are we aware of it? Is it a long-term issue? I guess it must be. And what's our kind of solution for that? The second one, I don't have the exact figures, but it has been announcements in the last couple of days about teacher pay rises and school funding, etc. So I think it's 5% for teachers this time, which isn't in line with inflation, and sort of there's discussions now about kind of balloting strike action around that. But also I think, this might be wrong, that per school funding is only 2%. So actually now, you know, you'll have the 5% increase in salaries, which the kind of response has been that's like not adequate and not sufficient. But as well as that, the school funding increase only 2%. So head teachers are going to have this increase in staffing costs, and then not the same increase in funding. So that's going to impact quite a lot. And I appreciate that's not not your fault, but just your thoughts about that. Will you be like raising that, and do you expect that to also have quite a significant impact? So that would be. I think those, and then yeah, those are my two key ones. I can always come back, but I don't want to take up too much more time.
No, perfect. Thank you.
So on the pupil premium front, we are aware of the fact that there may be some parents who are not identifying as being eligible for free school meals. From time to time, we have a big push on that with schools. Schools have a big push themselves because they know there is much to be gained for those families and for the schools. So we do keep coming back to this. It was almost kind of like a regular sort of push on encouraging families to do that. But ultimately, it's the family's decision whether they want to do that or not. So of course, schools are looking at, and we discuss with schools, ways to encourage parents to do that. You know, it might be a language issue, it might be a cultural issue, it could be, you know, and I think our schools are very well tuned and well placed and very sensitive towards those things and manage those things very well. So, yes, we are aware when we have a push, we do get a bit more uptake, but it is something that we have to keep revisiting because of the mobility of families coming in and out, but also the mobility of families being eligible as the thresholds change, usually lower or rise, whichever way you want to look at it. So yeah, it is a regular area that we visit. In terms of the funding, you're absolutely right. Disastrous funding settlement for schools, 1.9%, and then the recent announcement about a 5% increase without additional funding into school budgets to do that. So we are seeing. We're talking to schools at the moment about their budget setting, and you know, most schools, the salary costs are the lion's share of where the budget goes. So they are around about between 80 and 90% at the moment of the school's budget. And then if you take into consideration the rising cost of utilities, it's not really going to leave much left for anything else. So it's critical, and it will have an impact on schools and an impact on their ability to deliver what they've been delivering. So what usually happens in situations like this is that they will look, in the past, schools have looked to a mixture of staff, younger, newer, cheaper. But actually, there was another announcement with starting salaries for new teachers, which has gone up. So every which way, the school budgets are being squeezed.
Please.
Something for the Commission, probably, Chair. But I had sort of forgotten to mention it then, but I was aware, obviously, of this, of the utilities, and lots of schools that I'm aware of are kind of just having a real crisis with energy bills, etc. So I feel like there's going to be like a real crisis in school funding this autumn, Chair. If you think of what we just talked about with the school funding and the salaries, it's things like pension contributions are actually now much greater than they used to be for the employer, for schools as well. Plus all the utilities in winter months. So if that could be something for the Commission to continue to look at, I think it's going to be, well, dire, really, I think, this autumn.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. We have two questions very quickly. Mr. Cargbo.
I would like to first start by thanking you for the contributions you made. I'm also a deputy chair of governor in a school. About the following rules, what can you do as the council? Because I noticed that I spoke to some parents or other people in the school. One of the issues that the council, especially the Black people from the Black, African and ethnic minority groups, the BEAM group, the council has been rehousing some people out of London, which is also affecting the roles in London. So I don't know if there's any way they can look into that also, because that's a big impact, and that is affecting the budget of the school also, as you know, because some schools are close to getting into administration at this moment, which needs to be looked at critically. Yeah, and those are the things that we need to, and you talk about the people's premium. Most parents don't know about what that's, so if the school can also promote that more so that parents will know, because some are entitled to it, but they are not aware of the people that they'll get some benefit from it. So if you can also help to promote it. For Councillor Ali, is your presentation, is it available?
Yes, of course. I'll circulate my presentation. Can I just say, it's lovely to meet you. If I may, Chair, can I just come in on that? I think, you raise a very good point about the housing, and obviously we've had, regeneration where we've developed housing, and there's always the offer, that families can come back. But of course, in the space it takes to develop these housing, people get settled elsewhere. So you're not guaranteed that people will come back. But I think there's something else happening here. And this is why I would point you again to the census. Have a look at that, because, if it's not just so that, and, basically, and we're not we're by far not the worst, you know, when you look at Camden and other areas, you know, that there's a big, you know, migration of families moving out. There's something else happening here. You know, we've looked at many of the reasons, but, you know, some people have made the comparison between London and Paris in the late 1980s, you know, whereby you could go there, but you wouldn't see any working class people there other than people servicing, because people just couldn't afford to live there. And I do think, you know, that this demographic shift born out, you know, that we're seeing in the census is a thing. And I think no one's really looking at that. So again, back to the data set, you know, you're in a very good position, you know, to really shed some light on this. And I think, you know, that's a very perceptive issue. And if I may, on the issue that Councillor Browning raised and you know, that you concurred with on the pupil premium, you know, I can't thank you enough for bringing that to our attention, because it's in plain sight. Because when, you know, we were dealing with in the height of the pandemic, you know, when we were just getting resources to where it needed to be, and obviously we wanted to make sure that people got free school meals even when they weren't in school and in the holiday, it was almost like don't bother looking for eligibility. We're just going to make it universal, because we know that more and more people are falling into this free school meals, you know, threshold. So if that's an unintended consequence, where we have now families, even more families struggling and not getting what they should be getting, then we need to be all over on that, over that. And, you know, I hope that Nina and I will go back and work something out, because I know the school that my children are in, you know, I mean, the school is, you know, very on top of who needs pupil premium. That might be because there aren't that many, but nevertheless, you know, they're on top and making sure that that support is given. And really, when I don't think it was a Labour administration that came up with this, because obviously it replaced the EMA, but, you know, one of the things was about pupil premium that it followed the students, it followed the pupils. So, you know, we're really doing our families a disservice if, you know, they're sitting there and not benefiting from it. So thank you so much for shedding the light on that.
Mr. Cargo.
Yeah. Good. To add to what you just mentioned, during the lockdown, for instance, there were a couple of parents that they're on low income, but they were not getting any of like free school meal. So it's not like you can't get it automatically, because most of them they don't aware that they were supposed to apply for it. So it was not like something that you just get like that. Even some help that the council gave, like some like laptops, like iPads, those other stuff to help them to educate during like homeschooling. So it was only some certain people that got them, and some people that were in need did not get them. So if you can also look at that, please.
I mean, I will look at that, but I will answer that. If I may, and that is, you know, there was a long period whereby no one was getting very much in terms of laptops. We had some for our care experienced children, which our social workers handed, you know, went to their houses and hand delivered them. But, you know, there was an issue when Gavin Williamson was just doing adverts, you know, and he was putting these laptops and devices onto lorries, but I don't know where they were going. They weren't coming here. And it was by the third lockdown that we managed to raise quite a lot of funding to get, you know, laptops for anyone that needed them. So, you know, I'm pretty shocked to find that there were, you know, because in the end, you know, we just had to fight to spend all the money that we've raised. So, you know, it is worth looking on that, but I'm surprised to hear that. And equally, I mean, I hope Nina will come in, but on the free school meals, you know, we were so lucky, and like other boroughs, because we'd already had a voucher system. So literally we were pressing a button and the schools were administering, you know, those vouchers. So, you know, I'm really a bit surprised to hear that.
Thank you. We'll take Councillor Bentley, but just for clarification on Mr. Cargway's point, given that free school meals is universal at primary level, does anyone have to do anything in order to access that?
No. No, that they just need to be in school. And if children are in school, they will get a meal. And since the beginning of COVID, not just during term time, they've been getting vouchers for the holidays as well. And they'll be get vouchers for this summer holiday too.
And that includes those on no recourse to public funds. Councillor Maggie Browning, quickly.
I could ask if Mr. Carbo was talking about that during the school closure, perhaps, or
just during the school closure.
So when the schools were closed, were children on free school meals being given vouchers, and was everyone given vouchers? Right. Okay.
Perhaps I can,
afterwards.
I can vouch for that, because we Nina's team are working all night before the holidays to make sure that all of that got to the school so that could get out, really. And I remember picking up bits of casework which came to me saying, oh, this family hasn't got it, how can we do that? And then we'd have to contact the school and they'd say, okay, just send them to the office. So I'm so I'm a bit surprised that people fell through the net, because this is the net. So, thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bentley, final question for this section, and then we'll take a 5-minute break.
Okay, I'll be super quick.
Please.
So we're only looking at primary here, which is what we agreed. But I just wanted to raise, obviously, the elephant in the room, that these kids will be going to secondary school. And I know Councillor Ali showed that, the majority of secondary schools here are academies. But I just wanted to flag that and say, what's the forward plan? Because we're in this period of incredible volatility across the board with everything that's going on in the economy, and just really thinking about, is that on the agenda?
Yeah, of course it's on the agenda, because obviously, once bitten. So we're looking at those trends within an inch of their life. But there are some interesting things that are coming up, because if your children are in secondary, then you're more, as a family, it does feel that you are more settled here, more able to live here. Do you know what I mean? And that pull for the secondary school means that people tend to stay around more. What will be interesting now is to see, basically looking at the trends, because people are saying, that one's saying that it will come back up, which is why one of the things that we didn't cover here is that Nina and I are fighting tooth and nail to make sure any school that has to close, stays in the education estate, because we know that this will come back again, and we don't want the people that replace us to have to start from scratch again, building them. So we want to keep them in the estate, but we're also monitoring, the trend from primary to secondary.
So thank you. What I'd add to that is that I meet regularly with the secondary heads, and something that's we are planning in early next term is to bring them up to date with what the projections are looking like, what the numbers are like in primary, what might be coming through into secondary, and how that might be impacting them. Now, we've got 20 secondary schools in the borough. Almost all of them are part of large academy trusts. So secondary schools are larger organisations, just individually they're larger than a primary school. And so in terms of the actions that they might take in the first instance to mitigate some of that reduction in pupil numbers, they will be able to do more easily than a primary school. But if it goes beyond that, then I'm sure, and I know, because I've met with the CEOs of many of those larger academy trusts, is that they are already looking at that across their trusts. So they will need to be developing their own strategies about how they're going to manage that as a trust.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Jasmine Ali. Thank you, Nina Dohel. I know you've had a whirlwind of a 48-hour, both. So we appreciate you coming today. And I think for the audience, those who are watching online, I think it's worth highlighting here that what we've been able to do today is not just hear the evidence at hand, but also start to think of other people we would like to come and give evidence to us, so we're able to make some good recommendations. And what we haven't done today purposely is scrutinize the council on its strategy, because we think it would be a bit too premature to do that without having the right level of evidence and information before us. So thank you very much, and have a good rest of the evening. We'll take a break for now. Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Jasmine Ali.
Just before I go, I just wanted to say, you know, obviously Nina and I are like, you know, we've been at the forefront of this, you know, and so we've like basically, you know, we've been at the forefront trying to deal with it and support people and everything. But I think really what I've found with it being not just a, you know, a London issue, a national issue, is that this is now beginning to generate quite a lot of interest here. And I just think, you know, what an interesting time to be looking at these trends. And I've got every confidence that you will, you know, really add value to this, not just in Southwark, but nationally as well. And I will give you, I will also send you, you know, some of the contacts that are made nationally, because I think it might be good for you to bring some of those in as well. Thank you. And
thank you. The Commission will welcome that. Thank you very much. We'll go on a 5-minute break. Oh, we can go back. Thanks very much. The next item we have on our agenda is the Commission hearing some evidence from Matt Little, who's the Principal Strategy Officer, the Chief Executive's office, and we've asked him to come and speak to us about the Council's role in addressing the impact that businesses will face given the cost of living crisis impending that they're currently in, as well as the impending recession. And he'll specifically be looking at issues around jobs and recruitment, business support, community wealth building, i.e. addressing the supply chain question and the London living wage. Now, on this specific topic, it's worth highlighting that the impact on businesses in the face of the cost of living crisis is something that the Council, of course, can contribute to help to mitigate, but there are also some issues that are specific to businesses that are out of the Council's control. So we will have be hearing some evidence from various businesses who might be able to tell us innovative ways in which we can help to support them more broadly. But Matt, over to you just for a preamble, and then we'll go to some questions.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, so I'm sort of representing obviously Councillor Seaton, who couldn't make it, as well as other senior colleagues. So I'll do my best and hopefully help you on the way. I won't go through this in any great detail. Hopefully you've read it or will read it. But Councillor Cherry has kind of hit the nail on the head. This is quite a global issue, certainly a national issue. So it's it's not something specific, certainly to Southwark. So what Danny Edwards, the Head of Economy, has done with this report is hopefully kind of highlight what we're doing for local businesses across the board at the moment to hopefully mitigate some of those kind of macro impacts and certainly the cost of living crisis. So just to really run through this super quick, we've got an economic strategy which is being developed. Now, obviously, these are sort of fluid documents. We do a period of consultation, and we hopefully get these in a great place to help for the next few years. But we need to be reflective of kind of current trends, etc. So it's out for consultation at the moment. There's some real broad themes being consulted on, but the cost of living, and the impacts that we're seeing, as I say, post-pandemic and all the rest of it, needs to be part of that consultation. So we will be speaking with businesses about what we can help with specifically as we move forward and develop a strategy for the next few years. Jobs and recruitment, we've got Southwark Works, which is our kind of long-standing flagship employment service. That is both for employers to help them to take on local people, and it's also for local people, particularly those that are facing barriers. So again, that kind of cost of living element where people are struggling to find work, but also the poverty in work. So it's about getting those good jobs, hopefully jobs that pay a fair wage and meet that kind of inflationary costs. And then business support specifically, even though we're limited in what we can do, we're putting, as a local council, £2 million into Pioneers Fund, which is, going to be a real flagship for Southwark. Speaking to other councils, it's certainly above and beyond what most of them are doing at the moment. And yeah, that's going to be a real, hopefully a boon to a lot of local businesses who are interested in this, either starting their own businesses or growing their businesses. And that's going to be for a 4-year program, starting imminently, starting in the next couple of months. So we'll be launching that. Supply chain, it's a broad issue, but one of the main things we're doing around that is sort of community wealth building, which covers a multitude of sins. But yeah, it's about looking at local spend and how we can sort of strengthen the local economy by putting more of our kind of anchor institution spend into the local economy. So there's a Southwark Anchor Network, and working with CLES, the Centre for Local Economic Strategies at the moment around procurement spend across the Anchor Network, hopefully getting a picture of where we spend locally. where we don't spend locally and where we could spend locally. So hopefully enhancing the kind of local economy through this, a stronger supply chain. And that's something we're looking at in the Pioneers Fund as well, is helping local businesses with procurement specifically, to see if we can, again, improve their prospects of securing both public sector and other contracts. And then finally, London Living Wage. So that sort of really is, there's a council plan commitment about doubling the number of accredited London Living Wage employers. So our baseline is about 250, and so a steering group is in place, and that's really about driving that agenda, highlighting the benefits to employers of being a London Living Wage employer, and obviously the benefits that go with paying all of your staff, again, a fair wage. And that's it in a nutshell, but I'm happy to take questions as we go.
Thank you very much. And just to place on the record, as you mentioned, Councillor Martin Seaton and Councillor, I'm elevating him, Danny Edwards and Stephen Gaskill aren't able to make tonight because they are at an award ceremony for which Southwark is up for providing some of the best support to businesses during the pandemic, in grants and in other areas of support too. So that's why they're not here tonight. I could, if I may, Commission, I'll kick off with a question. The new economic strategy for Southwark. So the next steps you mentioned will include an external consultation with partners and communities over the summer, which is probably now, and over the coming weeks. What would be really helpful, I think, if you could, is for that consultation to really highlight what's being done by businesses around reducing poverty in and out of work, because what we know in Southwark specifically is that there's significant amount of the working population that are in work poverty, and that has quite a lot of unintended consequences, I guess, across the gamut, but specifically how they're responding to inflationary pressures when it comes to pay, and how they're ensuring that the lowest members of staff are having, the requisite amount of pay increases in order to face up to the challenges that are before them. And I think what that might mean for us specifically will be maybe being quite innovative in looking at the extent to which we're willing to work with some businesses when it comes to our procurement, where they haven't done enough to ensure that they're protecting staff, who ultimately we would be working with through contracts that we procure, we procure, either or. So that would be really helpful. If you could come to that question, and then I'll take some others.
Yeah, happy to do so. Happy to incorporate any additional information into the consultation. And yes, I'll certainly feedback that we're keen to know how businesses are addressing the inflationary pressures when it comes to wages. It's something that we'll be probably tackling as we have our London Living Wage unit as well, because obviously when you're encouraging people to pay London Living Wage, they've often got some barriers and reasons why they can't. So it'd be interesting to see how those that have been accredited are maintaining their levels and continuing with their accreditation. So yeah, happy to incorporate that as part of that process.
Thank you very much. Questions from members? Councillor Vamby.
Thank you for that. I just had a question about the Southwark Works programme. Talks about specialist support being available for ex-offenders, and one of the most pertinent issues I think in Southwark is the cycle of crime, from people going into prison, coming out of prison, going back into prison, just because it's so difficult to find opportunities or a way out of that cycle. And so I just wanted to know what kind of specialist support that is for ex-offenders, how aware ex-offenders are of this support, and the success rate of the scheme, if that's possible. Thank you.
yeah, I can certainly come back to you with the specifics on that, about how many of the clients there can sort of get employment, etc., and the success rate, and also what the outreach is and the demand and things like that. But yeah, I mean, the whole Southwark Works kind of premise is very much about being tailored to specific needs. So not a one size fits all approach. So the provider will be specifically specialist in dealing with ex-offenders. So we'll kind of have the hopefully expertise and experience to be able to tailor that offer accordingly. And yeah, I mean, there's a cycle of recommissioning. So we monitor performance, on an ongoing basis. So yes, they are successful in achieving those outcomes for that cohort. So, but I'll take that away and give you some specifics around that, if that's okay.
Councillor Bentley.
Thank you. Yeah, so thank you for the report. It was great. I have 3 quick questions, following, I think, from what Councillor Tomlinson said earlier. Sometimes I just think it'd be helpful to understand a little bit more about the numbers. So, for example, in point 12, it says 85% of the clients engaged were supported into work. It's just kind of, it'd be helpful to know, how many that was in actual numbers, but it's a very small point. And then the second point was around the recontracting of the Southwark Works contract. I think you said it's up for renewal, where is it, in June 2023. And just thinking, with my community wealth building hat on, one of the things that we hear often is, that they're very beholden to our timescales in terms of recommissioning. And, I'm assuming, I know you put here that there's going to be an independent evaluation, but just kind of making sure that they've got kind of adequate time, because I'm assuming they're probably hoping that that's going to be re-renewed. So doing that in a timescale that also kind of considers them. And then the final point that I just wanted to mention as well is on the living wage. Another thing that I think that we're seeing areas start to really think about is not just the wage, but the conditions. So for example, you might have a person who will be on a 0 hours contract on a living wage, on a London living wage, because that's more attractive with the cost of living crisis than doing an apprenticeship where they're going to get kind of half the pay. So just, I guess thinking about that as well, and looking at those micro barriers. I think, as you were saying, with a family that's only got, say, one person in work, they're much more likely to stay in a job that's paying the minimum wage than to take on an apprenticeship because they just can't afford it. So I don't know if that's a question, but I think there was one in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all good points. So again, we'll come back with sort of numbers attached to the, paragraph 12. That's fine. I think that's a really good point around the Southwark Works recommissioning, and I think that's a point that we've learned in the past. It's been recommissioned now a few times, and yes, we are often dealing with kind of smaller providers who are need to have some due notice, etc. So, and we fully engage them in that process. And yes, it's been evaluated at the moment by a consultant who's going to hopefully feedback quite soon into that. But yeah, we'll make sure it's as transparent and the timetable is as generous as possible, so everyone can kind of get their ducks in a row for that and stand at good opportunity and new people as well, obviously, so that it's a competitive process. On the last point, I think it's absolutely not just London Living Wage and that's it, isn't it? It's the whole sort of good pay, good work standard as well. So that's something that we're always, when we engage with businesses, etc., banging the drum of the whole gambit of what a good employer looks like, not just a get out of jail, we pay London Living Wage, because as I say, there's nuances to that sometimes. So when we look at case studies and local champions, we'll obviously take into account more than just than that. But again, a good point.
You, Councillor Brown.
Thank you for the report. It's really good to see, and I welcome some of the high-level ideas and approaches that are being considered. For me, the elephant in the room is rent hikes. I've been speaking to businesses in my ward of South Bermondsey who are really concerned about the significant increases in their rent. So I've been speaking to certain business owners who are facing rent hikes of up to 23% this year. And so, of course, a lot of this pales into insignificance if you're a business owner facing that much of a rent increase. So I'm just wondering what we're doing to support loyal businesses who have been in Southwark for many, many years, who are suddenly facing this steep increase.
Yeah, so again, you know, there's some things that we're within our gift and others that probably don't. So we'd have to look at the specifics around whether it's a council-owned property, etc. Obviously, we have, you know, relationships with developments. We put in place things like affordable workspace, you know, policies and things like that. Colleagues in planning, colleagues in regeneration will be very useful for things like, oh, we're being attacked, sorry. Yeah, very useful for kind of the future proofing of kind of affordable workspaces. But yeah, there are just going to be some units, I guess, that are privately, you know, owned on a commercial basis, and depending on where they are and kind of what the demand is, it may be market forces that are just, as I say, beyond our specific gift. But, you know, happy to look at any specific cases and take it away.
Councillor Brown, just to your point and following Matt's point, I think what we can do is, we know that there are a number of landlords that own significant chunks of commercial units up and down our borough, and it might be worth us inviting them to the commission to talk about exactly that point, and what support they're offering to their tenants, as well as understand the rationale behind increasing rents at such astronomical levels. I think it will be good for us to hold them to account too, because I think we need to be clear about our role, but they need to be clear about theirs too. So I think that's something that we'll look into and invite to our commission over the coming months. Yes, you may.
I'm not clear exactly whether it's Southwark who's the landlord in some of these cases. I think probably, but yeah, I welcome that.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Councillor Browning.
Thank you, Chair. This is definitely not my area of expertise compared to the earlier topic, but just a couple of questions. So I really welcome the kind of report on community wealth building. Would you be able just to say a bit more, I mean, about procurement, and particularly like council procurement? So, you know, as the local authority has a role to play in keeping money within the borough. So just how does local authority use its budget to procure from local providers rather than more widely? Shall I ask my second question?
Please.
Yeah. And then just going on what Councillor Brown said, sort of further down the line, given the kind of national cost of living crisis, which also affect businesses, that there may be empty properties, and you know, in the borough, more, well, there always are, but there might be more. And well, for me, the council becoming the landlord for empty properties, you know, gives them greater say of what happens to those properties, etc. So if you could say a bit about if there would be a big increase in empty business properties, what remit do we have to buy them, potentially CPO in the right circumstances, and well, because to me that would be preferable to having lots of empty shops and then becoming the landlord for those businesses. Would be, you know, my preferred outcome. So just a bit of information about that would be great.
Yep, thank you. So just on the procurement question, I think Commission would benefit from having our procurement team here. We've got our fairer procurement strategy, which does outline the direction of travel to spend local where possible, and there is always an encouragement to do so. That includes local SMEs as well. But part of the work that GLES is doing is really to get kind of baseline, understand how much we do actually spend locally. And then that'll be a starting point for hopefully a kind of a bit of a sort of step change, you know, a catalyst for change, certainly, to say, actually, we can do more. And what does that look like? And then put together some specific guidance for commissioners across the council to say, actually, you know, is there a percentage figure that we're aspiring towards? Do you have to kind of jump through extra hurdles to not spend locally, to make kind of local spending the default. So there's lots of potential ways to do it, but obviously that would have to be implemented a council-wide strategy. But I think the CLES work is definitely the first part of that, and then hopefully we can, the council can be the champion on this, that will then drive the change across our partners in the anchor networks and beyond. And that's certainly the idea behind that piece of work. And the empty properties one is always one of those controversial issues where you always, if you see an empty unit, you think that could be made to use. The local economy team, which is my sort of area of expertise, don't deal with properties per se. So again, I think maybe Matt Jackson from Property Service team may be well placed to talk about what we're doing in terms of firstly our own properties, which came up earlier, and how we're helping businesses, but also what we can do where we see empty properties and whether we have certain powers, etc., and whatnot, because I think that's it's a valid point in terms of demand and supply.
Does that answer your question? Excellent. I had one question. It might be the final one, I'm not sure. Around the Southwark Pioneers Fund. So there's £2 million fund which will support small medium enterprises, particularly those who are women that own businesses, those who are from the Black, Asian, minority, ethnic community, and with inflationary pressures, the extent to how far that fund can go has changed, right? Since we set the £2 million figure, of which some will go towards business support and then some will be in grants. In terms of the business support element and what we'll be able to get from the providers supporting the businesses over the 4 years, will we still get the same bang for our buck?
Yes, hopefully. We have only just recently commissioned it. So the bids were kind of, conscious of rise of inflation and the cost of everything. So they should have factored that into their bids. So yeah, we their numbers should stack up really for the next 4 years. But I guess that's something that could be an ongoing, watching brief, as with any contract, if costs go through the roof. They are ultimately service contracts, and so the bulk of the costs will be on the staff. So it's if they can manage the sort of staffing element of obviously those that provide that support. So it hopefully shouldn't be too bad, and yeah, we can still maintain the kind of the levels that we'd hope to acquire with that £2 million.
Thank you very much. I don't think there's any other questions from members. Thank you, Matt, for stepping in. And I think it was just useful to understand what the council was doing to support businesses during this time. I think often the cost of living is looked at through the lens of the consumer only, but there are businesses that will suffer during this period. And we'll be inviting businesses and other organisations to give evidence about what's needed during this very tough time and how we can recommend to the council some other innovative things that can be done. But thank you very much, and appreciate you coming all the way. Thank you. Thank you. The next item on our agenda, which will I think be quite short, is the work programme for 22-23. So the two kind of big meaty issues that we'll focus on is the pupil places, which is obviously quite a big issue, and the impact that businesses will face in the cost of in the face of the cost of living crisis. But it'll be useful to hear from members about other issues that they think will be helpful for us to look at over the municipal year. I'm conscious that, Amit, correct me if I'm wrong, we have 3 more meetings, or 4 more I asked for an additional one, did I? Okay, yeah. We have 4 more. Yes, I'm a kind chair. I asked for an additional one because I thought it would be good for us to give proper time to these things. But we have 4 more meetings, so I'm conscious that if we want to achieve what we seek to achieve, which is very good recommendations, trying to keep the issues tight as possible is helpful, but we don't want to do that at the expense of scrutinizing important other issues that aren't on this list. So it'd be useful to hear from members if they think there's anything worth us also looking at. Councillor Browning.
Thanks, Chair. I'm conscious that I'm a reserve and so may not be at future meetings. But my suggestion would be that obviously Cabinet agreed their inclusion charter this week. There's been some press coverage of that. And so that's about massively reducing the number of school exclusions in the borough. It's on the back of ex-Councillor Babudu's report when he chaired this commission, I think. So I think it would be great to see like the embedding of that charter, how it's the views of stakeholders like teachers, head teachers, alternative provision institutions, etc. So the embedding of that charter that was adopted this week would be my suggestion for this commission.
That seems eminently sensible. I know it was looked at over a period of 3 years, and it'll be remiss of us to not look at what the progress has been since the charter was adopted, which was 2 days ago. So yeah, that seems sensible. As long as other commission members are in agreement. Yeah, Councillor Tomlinson.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I also think like we could potentially, obviously there's like quite a lot of different ways in which the inclusion charter is really important. Mine says that some of it was to do with like the disproportionate exclusion of Black children, and I think there is other work that could be done on anti-racism in schools. So something that I think would be interesting is things like looking at like the diversity of school staff and looking at whether schools are encouraged to kind of have like BAME retention policies for their staff. Looking at diversity of governing boards. I think like I know that we're already doing some work on the curriculum, and I think the inclusion charter is really important. And for me, that just seems like another area, and that also kind of like links into the stuff around local economy as well, in terms of like who Southwark is providing jobs to and anchor institutions. So yeah, I don't know if we could like definitely have the big focus on inclusion, but also just perhaps slightly broaden it out and maybe look at the way the stuff around decolonizing the curriculum is being delivered as well.
Yeah. Okay. I think to that end, what might be sensible is if we have some sort of written report that details, the update on things relating to the inclusion charter, as well as those points that you make. And then given the report and the facts and figures behind what we receive, we can then seek to kind of focus on one or two of those things in the interests of being able to give reasonable amount of time to it. And it may well be actually what's uncovered from what we hear or what's provided to us in writing. We might seek to even go beyond we might seek to actually look at it beyond this municipal year as a topic for next year as well as this year. Yeah. Yes, Mr. Cogwood.
Yeah. Just to add to what you just mentioned, I don't know whether you're aware of the Southwark Life Matters.
Southwark stands together.
Yeah, good. Those are these things that some of them, they are key to what has been deliberated on, like to check in schools, the governing body, diversity in the governing bodies is very sensitive, even the staff in schools. So I think it will be good if we can invite someone to speak more on those issues, because it has been an issue that is very alarming in those meetings, that people share their experience. Even in some schools, I'm not trying to be biased or what, but in most governing bodies, you find few Black people there. Yeah. And I've witnessed short things wherein when you want to make a decision, they say, well, let's vote. So at the end of you are always like the minority side. So your voice they don't hear your views much about those things. Yeah.
Thank you. I think just thinking about it a bit further, I think what we could do also is, given that Councillor Ali and Nina will come back to the commission at some point to do a formal interview, we can include that as part a significant part of what they ought to focus on during the interview process, which will, I think, help give it more time as well as the written update that we seek to receive. Yes, don't jump all at once. Yes, Councillor Brown.
Can I suggest something on climate?
Yeah.
There's a few things I'm thinking about. Businesses and their performance on climate, their net zero targets. Is that something we should be looking at and scrutinising? And also around schools. Schools are doing great work on the Net Zero Schools initiative, which is lovely. But actually, children in Southwark schools are the ones who will be affected most by climate change. They're the next generation who'll be facing it, but also they're the next generation that we're going to rely on to tackle it. So I think there could be something there. And I think that could link to green jobs as well, which I know is a focus for Southwark. So I'm not entirely sure what exactly it would be, but something that packages all of that up under climate could be quite interesting.
Yeah. I think obviously sustainable freight is something that the Environment Scrutiny Commission are looking at, i.e. how businesses deliver and take in orders. I think also we know our biggest polluters in our borough are large businesses, mainly retail outfits like Tesco, Morrison's, other big organizations. So I think in our quest to get information from some of our larger employers on the effects that the cost of living is having on them, we can seek to understand to what extent might their ambitions around net zero be impeded by other things higher up their agenda, if at all. And I think on schools, we can use the interview process to cover that as well with the cabinet member. Yeah. Okay. Good. Councillor Bambi.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to know more about this Southwark Works program, particularly in terms of the outreach. So I know kind of as a council, we have a problem in terms of outreach. And because I really welcome this program in terms of reaching and supporting people vulnerable, unemployed, mental health issues, homelessness, drug abuse, ex-offenders. But I just want to know in terms of the detail of our outreach program and how we can further that. And it states here that we have a problem with outreach and engagement. When we do reach people, we have a high success rate, but the problem is reaching those people. And so, these are really important issues, and I'm just really keen on how we can further that outreach in terms of reaching these highly important disadvantaged groups of people. I think would be really important.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but we typically tend to interview both cabinet members related to both of these portfolios. So Councillor Martin Seaton and in this instance, Councillor Jasmine Ali, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so we'll use Councillor Martin Seaton to interview to drill down on that point, and on the other interviews that we're having, drill down the points that Maggie, Chloe and Cassie mentioned. Cass. Did I say Cassie? Look at me just making up names. Cass. Yeah, I think so. We use the interview processes to sort that out. Yeah. And yes, Councillor Bentley.
I know we already talked about quite a lot of the agenda. I think just as Matt just raised, I think looking at the Pioneers Fund, keeping a close eye on that. I know it's kind of part of what we're talking about, but just seeing how that actually evolves.
I agree. Yes, given that it's a 4-year program and it launches this year, it would be useful to see how it's progressing. So I think also using the interview process to cover that would be helpful.
Yeah, and like your point around 2 million might sound like a lot of money now, but who knows? Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Good. Councillor Browning, go on. No problem.
Just on Councillor Brown's point about climate schools and sorry, thank you, Everton. Sorry. Just on Councillor Brown's point about schools and green energy, I guess important to check with Councillor Newens what they're discussing there. But I know there are a lot of schools in the borough who are trying to have green energy as a way to lower costs because of the massive increase in their energy bills. So it'd be great for this or Councillor Newens Commission to look at that. on Councillor Thomason's point about drilling down into staffing, school governors, etc., and Mr. Carbo as well. If you do look at that, I think it'd be really useful as well to look at disciplinaries. Sort of anecdotally, I'm aware that Black teachers are essentially more likely to face disciplinaries, is my understanding anecdotally. So I think it'd be good for this commission to explore that and see if that is the case.
I think that's a really important point, and we most certainly will be looking at those issues that have been raised by Mr. Carbo. Who wants to speak? Yes, Mr. Carbo?
That is a key area because I happen to be a chair of the staff disciplinary panel. So what you raise is a key area which Black people are more of the victims. Black staffs, yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm.
We definitely will be taking a look at that. But yeah, thank you so much. I think something I did want to mention to the commission before we wrap up, I'm 4 minutes over, is in terms of how we gather evidence. What we could do, or what we traditionally do, is invite people to come to us. But outside of the remit of a formal meeting like this, which requires an agenda, etc., I will be forwarding to the commission events that we can attend in order for us to go and do some fact finding ourselves. That it may not necessarily present itself where every commission member is able to attend, but certainly where as many as possible are. That'll be a good way of us being able to get information. So, you know, Parliament does. There are a number of events hosted by different APPGs that we can go and sit on in order to gather evidence and ask questions that are relevant for our recommendations, as well as any other ideas that people might have. I don't think we just need to sit within the four walls of the council to get evidence, but that can inform how we scrutinise also. Good. Did you have a point? Okay, good. All right, well, I declare the meeting closed. Thanks very much. And the next meeting is scheduled for 17th of October at 7 p.m. Thank you, Councillor Browning, for stepping in. You've been excellent.
Thank you, Chair.